All right, Jordan, moving on to the next topic of the night. We're going to keep it rolling. Does Clemson have an NIL problem? I know you made a video earlier in the week addressing the Blake Hebert decommitment. That is the third decommitment in about a month's time for the Clemson Tigers in the 2025 class. Had two big defensive linemen decommit prior to that. Um, some of that is attributed to NIL. Obviously, some of that is these players getting bigger opportunities at other universities. So my question to you is, does Clemson have an NIL problem? I know Clemson has a smaller alumni base. Obviously, there's not as many alumni for a school the size of Clemson as there would be for, say, a school like Ohio State or Michigan or one of those universities that just have massive undergraduate programs, right? And then what if we do have an NIL problem? What is the specific problem? Is it the messaging around Clemson? Is it maybe the importance placed upon NIL? What are your thoughts? Does Clemson have an NIL problem? And if they do, what exactly is the problem?
I mean that's a tough question to answer, but I'm going to cheat. So y'all gonna get mad at me for saying it like this, but it's yes and no. Yep. As far as like NIL support and the funds needed to compete, I think Clemson has the funds to be pretty competitive in the NIL space. I know some people may not feel that way, but I think ultimately the issue when it comes to NIL is kind of their philosophy. And I don't even know if it's necessarily an issue. It's just what we've seen is kind of the consequence of the philosophy that they've chosen to take. Mm-hmm. And it starts with Dabo. He's made it very clear he does not want to, go out and pay a kid more, pay a high school kid or a transfer portal kid for that matter, more than what his starters are making. He's not going to want to, overspend in the high school ranks. So other schools are willing to do that. And that certainly has played a factor in some of the decommitments that Clemson has had this cycle. That's just the reality. There's nothing wrong with those recruits for taking those opportunities. So I don't want to slander them, but it's about what Clemson as a program is willing to do and what they how they choose to operate within the NIL space. And they have decided we're gonna give you something. It's going to be competitive, but you're not going to. I'm not going to pay a 5-star offensive tackle $1 million, in which might be more than what my starting left tackle is making. Like that's not how they're going to choose to do things. That's not how they've operated. This is what happens, and this is kind of the consequence. It works in some cases, and there's some positives for doing it that way because it helps with player retention, locker room culture, all of that. Because when Dave Clawson talked about it, last week. When you bring a guy in from the transfer portal, and you pay him, let's say $300K, and your starting corner is only making $100K. I'm just throwing out numbers, but he's going to want an increase. He's going to want more, or he's going to leave. And you don't want to foster that type of environment, I think, and that's the kind of environment that Clemson is trying to avoid, because that is happening at other schools for a fact. And with the way Dabo has operated his program, when you're a program that doesn't use the transfer portal, fostering an environment that will encourage the players you already have to leave is basically a death sentence. So I think that's kind of the philosophy. I'm not saying it's necessarily the right or wrong philosophy, but that is the philosophy. And that's kind of where we're at. And so you're going to have to be able to stomach, the losses, especially on the recruiting trail. But, it also might pay dividends. So we'll see how it goes. And again, this, in terms of high school recruiting, the cycle is not over. And Clemson is still evaluating its options. I've talked about it a little bit on my Twitter account about maybe some potential Clemson options. And we'll see how they go in terms of the quarterback sort of situation, and of course they still want to bring in another offensive lineman. So we'll see how they close this cycle out, and we might have a better picture of whether or not Clemson is really in trouble from that standpoint or not.
Yeah, certainly time will tell when it comes to this topic or this issue of NIL. Clemson has definitely gone about it a unique way. Obviously, we have talked on this channel a few times about NIL and how Clemson uses it, and they do choose to use it for roster retention. They do choose to pay the guys that have been there, pay the guys that are starting, pay the guys that have put in the work and earn the money. Not that they don't provide NIL opportunities for high school seniors transitioning and coming to Clemson. They obviously do provide NIL opportunities. But some of the numbers being thrown around by other universities, Clemson's just not going to get there. I think part of that is Clemson has kind of allowed a negative narrative to be spun when it comes to Clemson and their NIL, right? We haven't really done a good job as a university with our messaging, I think. And part of that is controlled by the national media and national media pundits and the talking heads and people here on YouTube and other things like that, different sports reporters. But I don't think Clemson's done a great job of the messaging and the philosophy that Clemson has. We kind of ignore the narrative out there instead of kind of trying to set it straight. I think we could do a little bit better there. Just my opinion. Now, you talk about revenue sharing. That's going to be here as early as next season. So come July, revenue sharing is going to be a thing. There's going to be, some reports of $20 or so million allocated for schools to use to pay athletes, right? Not all of that is going to go to football. It really depends on the school. Schools are going to make their individual decisions on how they break up that money. And then whatever money the football team gets, they're going to have to decide how that money's divvied up within the football team. Do you pay the starters a set amount and then the backups a set amount? How are you going to break it up? Or is it all even? And then you got the 105 scholarships coming. So you're going to have to cut, Dabo said you're going to have to cut like 40 dudes off the roster, right? And have to retool your roster that. So there's a lot of changes coming to college football. Dabo seems to think that the revenue sharing is going to help in this department. What is your opinion on how much the revenue sharing will help when it comes to this NIL landscape? Because I think, in my opinion, NIL is not going anywhere. Yes, there's going to be revenue sharing, and all these schools are going to be paying athletes, right, with the TV money that they receive, at least a portion of it. But I think NIL is still going to be a big player in college sports. What do you think?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think when people talk about the revenue sharing model and what that could entail, they kind of just sort of conveniently just push NIL to the side all of a sudden, and it's like, okay, now, it's like it's a replacement for NIL. But when the reality is that you're going to have revenue sharing and NIL on top of that. So while I do think revenue sharing will help, kind of clear the waters a little bit, there's still going to be a lot of NIL situations that you're going to have to be able to contend with, and it's still going to be a major player in recruits' decisions, because ultimately, that's always if I have an opportunity to make more money, I have an opportunity to make more money. Even if you are paying me, a base salary or whatever. So that's just that's the reality, and I mean that's in any profession. So that's just kind of where it's going. So I do think that NIL is still going to be a major player, but I do think the revenue sharing will certainly help in some ways kind of clear the waters a little bit and make things a little bit more above board. But NIL is still going to be a major a driving force and a potential deciding factor in a kid's decision. So I think that we're going to have to. It's just kind of wait and see. It kind of feels like we're all just at the mercy of the powers that be, and so and a lot of people are trying to prognosticate about how all of this is going to go down. But the reality is we won't know till we know.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, I think NIL is still going to be a big part of some of these key position recruitments, right? You talk about quarterback, you talk about, defensive end, some of these big time positions that draw the bigger NIL money. It's still going to be a huge point of emphasis, I think, in college football. And it's still going to be a difference maker for those that have the NIL money to throw around. And one of the interesting things that I heard Dabo kind of allude to in one of his press conferences this week was we need NIL money to get us to July, to where the revenue sharing kicks in. Again, I don't really like that messaging, because to me, that tells donor and fans, we just got to get NIL money to get us to July and then we're good. No, we're not good. We
Right.
still need NIL money to compete. The revenue sharing is going to be great, and it is going to even some of this playing field, and it is going to make some of these murky waters and kind of building out your roster. I think it'll make it a little bit easier, but NIL is not going anywhere. And teams are still going to be using it as a big time recruiting tool, and you're going to continue to lose people if you're not operating in an aggressive enough manner in the NIL world that we currently live in college football. Like it or don't like it, it's here and it's not going anywhere. So that kind of stuff kind of worries me. Last thing before we move on from the NIL talk and the recruiting and the revenue sharing and all that is, are there more decommitments coming to this 2025 class?
Yeah, that's a good question. I listen. At this point in recruiting, a lot of things can happen. But as it stands right now, there's not anybody in the class currently committed that I expect to decommit right now. So that's all I can. That's all I can. Really, anyone can say is at the moment, nothing is imminent. It appears, but things change, and again, these kids always have people in their ear and schools reaching out. We saw what happened with you saw what happened with Isaiah Campbell. You saw what happened with Blake Hebert. It's you don't know till you know in this era of recruiting. So you just have to hope that these kids stick to their commitment.
Yeah.
It was cool to see Gideon Davidson kind of put out he tweeted out like a farewell to Blake Hebert, but it was clear that he was not going to follow him to Notre Dame, which was a small possibility. The Notre Dame was trying to get Gideon to get Blake and Gideon as sort of like a package deal.
That would have hurt.
It didn't really work.
That would have hurt.
Yeah. So, that's just kind of the reality. You still have got, a lot of schools are still after guys like Tay Harris, Braden Jacobs. They had just had 24/7 Sports just had a recent rankings update. Both of them got major jumps up. Amari Adams is now a 5-star in the 24/7 Sports rankings. He's certainly been a guy that's been reached out to by a ton of schools. And you've had to fight at different points to, kind of put out those fires. So again, signing day is, 2 months away, but you don't really know. A lot of stuff can happen, but again, I'm not expecting anything soon or imminent right now.
Yeah. Let's hope that we have stopped the bleeding when it comes to the 2025 class. I see some people talking in the comment section. The IPTAY money cannot be used for NIL money. They're two separate pots of money. You have your IPTAY money. So if you're donating to IPTAY, none of that money can be used for NIL. All NIL money has to be donated through the 110 Society, and only the money directly donated to the 110 Society can be used for NIL. So I know there's some misconceptions out there with some fans that don't understand it. And unless you're really reading into this stuff, you're not going to understand it. But yeah, the $130+ million that, IPTAY raised last year or whatever it was, that doesn't help us with
none.
NIL.
Yeah, none of that is going to NIL.
It'd be nice if it did, but it doesn't. So I think things will get a little bit better when we get into revenue sharing, but the NIL still got to be something that you're constantly being aggressive with. And and usually picking your spots and where to use it. So it's not going away. It just is what it is. I don't necessarily like where college football has gone. I like some of the stuff. I don't like everything, obviously, but the changes aren't complete yet. I'm still holding out hope that we get to a more stable and better version of college football than we are currently in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, things will work themselves out in the end, but until then, it might be a bumpy ride, and there's going to be some frustrations and some losses along the way. I think that's just that's the reality for everybody. So, but I do think I tend to have the hopeful, outlook that things will work itself out, and
Yeah.
the sport will be at least in a stable place. I don't know if it's a better place, but at least stable place.
Yeah. More stability than we have right now, which is essentially none.